Boy Scout vanished in 2002. 25 years later, old compass, found in attic and reveals the attic air, thick with the ghosts of mothballs and forgotten Christmases, clung to Sarah's skin like a shroud. It had been her mother's house, now it was just a house, a container for things her mother had loved, things Sarah now had to sift through, categorize, and ultimately, discard. Each box was a sarcophagus of memory, and Sarah, the reluctant archaeologist, was growing weary of the dust and the grief. It was the 25th anniversary. Not the silver kind you celebrate with champagne and catered affairs. The kind you mark with a silent leaden weight in your stomach. A hollow ache that time had sanded down but never erased. 25 years since her brother, Leo, had walked into the whispering pines of Blackwood Forest for a Boy Scout camping trip, and never walked out. He was 12, she was 15. The numbers felt wrong, like a miscalculation on a test she could never retake. She slit the tape on another box. This one labeled Leo's things in their mother's looping, optimistic cursive. A pang, sharp and familiar, went through her. Her mother had never given up hope, not really. She'd kept his room pristine, his baseball glove oiled, his schoolbook stacked on his desk, waiting for a boy who would never turn the page. Sarah, the pragmatist, the one who had to hold the family together after their father left, had packed it all away after their mother's funeral last spring. It felt like a second betrayal. The contents were a time capsule of a 1990s boyhood, Pogs, a well-worn copy of Goosebumps, a binder thick with Pokemon cards that would probably be worth a fortune now. She smiled, a sad, watery thing. And then she saw it, tucked into the corner beneath a folded, ridiculously small Boy Scout uniform. His compass, not the cheap plastic one that came with the official kit, but his grandfather's, a heavy brass thing, its face clouded with age, the needle still quivering. Searching for a north that Leo had never found, Sarah picked it up. The metal was cold, a stark contrast to the humid attic air. Her thumb traced the intricate scrollwork on the back. The same pattern she'd traced 100 times as a child, mesmerized. Her grandfather, a man of the sea, had told them it was a special compass. That it always pointed true, not just to north, but to what you were looking for. A child's fantasy, but Leo had believed it with the fierce, unwavering faith of a 12-year-old. He'd been so proud to take it on his trip. As she turned it over in her palm, her thumb snagged on something, a tiny, almost imperceptible catch near the hinge. She'd never noticed it before. Frowning, she pressed harder. A faint click. The backplate, the one with the scrollwork, came loose. It wasn't just a plate, it was a lid. Her heart began to hammer. Against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. Inside the hidden compartment, no bigger than a thumbnail, was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. It was yellowed, brittle with age. Her fingers, suddenly clumsy and trembling, fumbled to unfold. The graphite was faded, the handwriting small and cramped, as if written in a hurry. In fear, it wasn't a note. It was a list of coordinates, and beneath them, a single terrifying sentence. He's not who you think he is. Don't trust the badge. The attic seemed to tilt, the rafters swimming in the dim light. The badge, the words slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Scoutmaster Robert Peterson. The man who had led the search parties. The man who had sat in their living room, his face a mask of practiced sorrow, and told her parents they'd done everything they could. The man who had been hailed as a hero, the stoic, heartbroken leader who had lost one of his own. A wave of nausea washed over her. It couldn't be. It was a prank, a sick, twisted joke Leo had cooked up. He'd loved treasure maps and secret codes, but the coordinates, they were real. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that they were real. And the fear that radiated from that tiny scrap of paper, a fear that had been sealed in darkness for a quarter of a century, was real, too. It felt like Leo's ghost, reaching out from the grave. Whispering the truth, he never got to tell. The air in the attic was no longer just thick, it was suffocating. The scent of mothballs was replaced by the phantom smell of pine needles and damp earth. She could see Leo's face, his bright, trusting eyes, the gap-toothed grin he'd given her before he'd hoisted his pack onto his shoulders. He'd been so excited, so proud of his grandfather's compass. He'd promised to find his way back. Don't trust the badge, the symbol of everything they had been taught to respect, to obey. The symbol of the man who had hugged her mother while she sobbed, who had placed a comforting hand on her own shoulder, his touch now feeling like a brand. The hero of their town's greatest tragedy. The compass slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered to the floorboards, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, ringing silence. The needle spun wildly, then settled, pointing north. But Sarah knew, with a dawning sickening horror, that for 25 years, it had been pointing at a monster hiding in plain sight. The search hadn't been a failure. It had been a cover-up. And the boy who had vanished hadn't just gotten lost. He'd been silenced. She scrambled down the attic ladder, the folded paper clutched in her hand, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The house felt different, charged with a sinister energy. The familiar portraits on the wall seemed to watch her with accusatory eyes. How could they not have known? How could she not have known? The questions were a swarm of angry bees in her head. Downstairs, in the sterile quiet of her mother's kitchen, she stared at the phone on the wall, an ancient landline her mother had refused to give up. Who could she call? The police. What would she say? I found a 25-year-old note from my dead brother in a compass that accuses the local hero of what they would think she was crazy. Another grieving sibling cracking under the pressure of a grim anniversary. They'd pat her hand and offer her a therapist's card. The same police department that had lauded Scoutmaster Rob for his tireless efforts. The same men, or their successors, who shook his hand at the annual town picnic. No. Not the police. Not yet, her mind raced, a chaotic slideshow of the past. The initial search, the frantic first 48 hours, the grid patterns laid out on maps in the makeshift command center at the ranger station. And at the center of it all, always, was Scoutmaster Rob. Directing volunteers, talking to the press, his voice calm and authoritative. He was a rock, everyone had said. A pillar of strength. Sarah remembered his eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they always seemed to be looking right through you. At the time, she'd thought it was the look of a man burdened by responsibility. Now, she saw it as the look of a man with nothing behind them. Avoid. She thought of the other boys on that trip. There were 3 of them, besides Leo, Mark, Kevin, and a quiet, nervous boy named Ethan. They'd all been interviewed, of course. Their stories had been identical. Leo had wandered off from the campsite in the middle of the night, probably to go to the bathroom. They'd called for him, but he didn't answer. They'd woken up Scoutmaster Rob, and the search had begun. A simple, tragic story. Plausible, too plausible. Were they in on it? Had they lied? The idea was monstrous. They were just kids. But Leo had been a kid too. She needed to find them. Mark, Kevin, and Ethan. Where were they now? They would be men, in their late 30s, just like her. With lives, families, jobs. Would they even remember? Or would they have buried the memory so deep it was unreachable? Her gaze fell on the note again. He's not who you think he is. It was a warning. Desperate, final message. Leo had known something was wrong. He had sensed a danger so profound that his last act was to hide a message, a secret witness for a crime that had been officially classified as an accident. He hadn't trusted the man in charge. He had trusted his grandfather's compass. He had trusted that one day, somehow, it would lead the truth to the right person. To her. The weight of that trust settled on her shoulders, a crushing responsibility. For 25 years, she had mourned the boy who got lost in the woods. Now, she had to seek justice for the boy who was silenced. The house was no longer just a house, it was the starting point. The compass hadn't just revealed a secret, it had given her a direction, and it wasn't pointing north, it was pointing directly at Robert Peterson, the Boy Scout master, the town hero. The man she now believed was a murderer, her brother's murderer. The floorboards beneath her feet felt unsteady, as if the very foundation of her world had cracked wide open, revealing a darkness she never could have imagined. The last quarter-century of her life had been built on a lie, a carefully constructed narrative of tragedy and misfortune. Now, with a single scrap of faded paper, the whole edifice was crumbling. The immediate shock, the raw visceral punch of the discovery, began to recede, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about a debt, a promise she never knew she had to keep. The boy in the woods was gone, but the man with the badge was still out there, living his life, wrapped in the warmth of a community's admiration. An admiration he had stolen. An admiration that was built on Leo's bones. She stood up, her movements stiff, robotic. She went to her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the clicks echoing in the silent house. She searched for Robert Peterson. He was still in town, of course. He'd never left. He was a real estate agent now, his smiling, trustworthy face beaming out from the webpage of a local agency. Your hometown expert, the tagline read. Beneath it, a biography that mentioned his years of service as a scoutmaster, his love for the outdoors, his commitment to the community. It read like a hagiography for a saint who had a secret buried deep in the Blackwood Forest. Then she searched for the others. Mark Renshaw. He was a lawyer in the city, 2 hours away. Kevin Liu, a doctor, practicing in California. And Ethan Miller, the quiet one, the nervous one. It took longer to find him. There was no social media profile, no professional listing. Just a single grainy photo from a local news article 10 years ago. He'd been arrested for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. The article was short, but it painted a picture of a man unraveling. A man haunted. Don't trust the badge. Was Ethan the key? Had he seen something? Had the weight of it broken him over the years? The questions spiraled, each one more terrifying than the last. Sarah felt a tremor start in her hands, a low hum of adrenaline and dread. She had stumbled into something far bigger than a family tragedy. This was a conspiracy of silence, a secret held for a quarter of a century. And she, the grieving sister, clearing out an attic, was the only one who held the key. The compass lay on the floor upstairs, its job done. Now, it was up to her to follow where it led, no matter how deep into the darkness she had to go. The cliffhanger wasn't just about what happened to Leo anymore. It was about what would happen to her, now that she knew the truth. Leo had been a sunbeam in human form. That was the only way Sarah could describe him. He didn't just enter a room, he illuminated it. His energy was a chaotic, joyful whirlwind of scraped knees, half-finished projects, and questions that started with, what if we? He had a scientist's curiosity and an artist's soul. A combination that made him both brilliant and perpetually covered in some unidentifiable substance. His greatest treasure was a shoebox he called the Museum of Important Things, which housed a petrified caterpillar, a bottle cap that looked vaguely like Abraham Lincoln, and a rock that was, he insisted, a fossilized dinosaur egg. His disappearance had been like the sun winking out at noon, plunging their family into a permanent, chilling twilight. Sarah's grief had been sharp and selfish. She hadn't just lost a brother, she'd lost her audience, her co-conspirator, her other half. Their mother's grief was a slow, quiet poison. It hollowed her out from the inside, leaving a fragile shell that smiled at neighbors and wept into Leo's pillow at night. Their father's grief was an explosion. It shattered his composure, his sobriety, and finally, his marriage, leaving him a ghost who drifted out of their lives a year after Leo vanished. The wreckage of that one, sunny October weekend had defined all of them. Leo was the epicenter, the ground zero of their family's destruction. He was the victim, not just of a predator, but of a stolen future. A life of what-ifs that would forever remain unanswered. Robert Peterson, Scoutmaster Rob, was the antithesis of Leo's bright chaos. He was a man of straight lines and sharp creases. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his posture ramrod straight, his smile a practiced, symmetrical thing that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. He was order, discipline, and control. To the parents of Blackwood Creek, He was a godsend, a man who could take their unruly video game-addled sons and mold them into responsible young men. He spoke in clipped, reassuring sentences, using words like character, integrity, and honor. But beneath the polished surface, there was a chilling stillness, a predator's patience. His past was a carefully curated narrative of service and civic duty, a short, undistinguished stint in the army, a series of low-level management jobs he'd always left for better opportunities, and finally, his true calling as a boy scout leader. He had no wife, no children of his own. "The troop is my family," he'd say, and the other parents would nod, their hearts swelling with admiration. They didn't see the way his eyes lingered on the boys, a flicker of something proprietary, possessive. They didn't see the way his hands, when he demonstrated how to tie a knot or pitch a tent, would rest on a shoulder or a back just a second too long. His secret was a deep, dark well of inadequacy and rage. He craved the power and adoration he felt he was denied in every other aspect of his life. The boys weren't his family. They were his subjects. He was their king, and the forest was his kingdom. A place far from the judging eyes of a world that saw him as a bland, unremarkable man. He was the antagonist, a monster cloaked in the virtuous fabric of the Boy Scouts of America. The hidden witness was Ethan Miller. In 2000, he was a whisper of a boy. Small for his age, with wide, perpetually startled eyes, and a nervous habit of chewing on the cuffs of his shirt. He was the kind of kid who was always picked last, the one who hovered at the edge of every game, desperate to be included but terrified of being noticed. His father was a hard man who worked long hours at the lumber mill and communicated mostly in grunts and backends. His mother was a faded, anxious woman who treated her son's sensitivity as a personal failing. The Boy Scouts had been her idea. "It'll make a man out of you," she'd pleaded with her husband. For Ethan, it was just another stage for his daily performance of fear. He was terrified of the dark, of spiders, of the older boys' casual cruelty. But most of all, he was terrified of Scoutmaster Rob. He saw what the other boys, and certainly the parents, missed. He saw the cold flash of anger in Peterson's eyes when a boy talked back. He felt the unnerving intimacy of the Scoutmaster's praise. He recognized the predatory stillness because he lived with a different kind of predator at home. On that camping trip, Ethan's terror had kept him awake. He was the one who saw Leo get out of the tent. He was the one who saw the Scoutmaster follow him, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the woods. He was the one who heard the muffled sound, not a cry for help, but a sharp cut-off sound of surprise and pain. He had stayed in his sleeping bag, paralyzed by a fear so absolute it felt like death itself. He had squeezed his eyes shut and prayed for a morning that he knew would change everything. The lie he told the next day, the same lie the other boys told, was the heaviest thing he would ever carry. It was a secret that festered, poisoning every relationship, every opportunity, every chance at happiness. It drove him to the bottle, to the fringes of a life he felt he didn't deserve to live. He was the keeper of the truth, a truth so terrible. He had to destroy himself to avoid telling it. Sarah's first call was to Mark Renshaw, the lawyer. She found his firm's number online and dialed before she could lose her nerve. A crisp, professional receptionist put her on hold, the generic hold music a jarring soundtrack to the storm in her head. Mark Renshaw. His voice was deep, confident. The voice of a man who argued for a living. "Mark, my name is Sarah Jensen. I don't know if you remember me. My brother was Leo Jensen." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not a long one, but it was heavy, weighted. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more cautious. "I was so sorry to hear about your mother. How are you?" "I'm the one cleaning out her house," Sarah said, skipping the pleasantries. "I found something in Leo's old things. Something, his grandfather's compass, the one he took on the camping trip." She let the words hang in the air. "Okay." Mark's voice was wary now. He was a lawyer, trained to see traps in every question. There was a hidden compartment, Mark, and a note inside, from Leo, another silence. This one was longer. She could hear the faint sound of him breathing. Sarah, that was a long time ago. We were kids. It was a terrible, tragic accident. Was it? Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. The note had coordinates. And a message. It said, "Don't trust the badge." The breath on the other end of the line hitched. For a split second, the confident lawyer was gone, replaced by the 14-year-old boy in the woods. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, recovering quickly. "Kids write stupid things. It was probably part of some game he was playing." Was it a game when Scoutmaster Rob followed him into the woods that night? The line went dead. Mark had hung up on her, but she had her answer. The hitch in his breath, the flash of panic in his voice. He remembered, he knew. He was just another man who had chosen silence. Next, she tried Kevin Liu. Finding the number for his medical practice in California was easy. Getting past his office manager was harder. Sarah had to lie, inventing a story about a high school reunion. Finally, she was put through. "Dr. Liu," she said, when his friendly, professional voice came on the line. "This is Sarah Jensen, Leo's sister." The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a clinical chill. "Yes, I'm calling about the camping trip. The one in 2000. "I'm sorry, I have a patient waiting," he said quickly. "I can't talk right now." "I found a note from Leo," she pressed on, her voice rising with desperation. "He mentioned Scoutmaster Peterson. He said not to trust him." "It was an accident," Kevin said, his voice flat, rehearsed. It was the same sentence Mark had used. The official story, repeated verbatim, 25 years later. The police did a full investigation. It was a tragedy. "Now, if you'll excuse me, did he ever touch you?" Sarah asked. The question raw, brutal. "Did he ever make you feel uncomfortable?" There was a long, ringing silence. She heard a door close softly in the background. When Kevin spoke again, his voice was a whisper, so low she could barely hear it. "You need to leave this alone. You have no idea what you're getting into. For your own good, drop it." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, a sound of finality, of a door being slammed and bolted shut. 2 calls, 2 identical reactions. Fear. Not just the fear of dredging up a painful past, but a fresh, immediate fear. As if the danger was still present. As if Scoutmaster Rob's reach extended across the country, across the decades, and could still command their silence. That left Ethan, the ghost, the boy who had unraveled. There was no phone number, no address, just the name of their hometown. Blackwood Creek. She had to go back. The drive to Blackwood Creek was a journey through a landscape of memory. The same familiar highway exits, the same water tower with the town's name painted in fading blue letters. But the town itself felt different. Smaller, shabbier, or maybe she was the one who had changed. She checked into the single, sad-looking motel on the edge of town, and then went to the only place she could think of to find someone who lived on the fringes. The local dive bar, the Rusty Mug. The bar was dark and smelled of stale beer and regret. A few old-timers nursed their drinks at the bar, their faces illuminated by the glow of a sports channel on the television. Sarah showed a picture of Ethan, his high school yearbook photo, the only one she could find, to the bartender. The bartender, a burly man with a weary face, squinted at the photo. "Ethan, yeah, I know him, or, I used to. Hasn't been around in a while. Last I heard, he was living in that rundown trailer park out on Route 7, can't miss it. It's the one that looks like a tornado hit it and then backed up for a second." Past the trailer park was even more depressing than the bartender had described. Rusting husks of metal sat on cinder blocks, their yards littered with weeds and debris. She found Ethan's trailer at the far end of the row. A faded American flag was taped to the window. She knocked on the flimsy aluminum door. There was a shuffling sound from inside, then the door creaked open, a few inches, held by a chain. An eye peered out. It was a man's eye, but it was filled with a boy's fear. It was bloodshot, surrounded by a web of fine lines, but it was unmistakably the eye of Ethan Miller. "What do you want?" His voice was a hoarse rasp, thick with disuse, and cheap whiskey. Ethan, I'm Sarah Jensen. Leo's sister. The eye widened. The door slammed shut. Ethan, please. She called through the door. I just want to talk to you. I know you saw something. I know what happened to my brother wasn't an accident. Go away, he yelled from inside. Leave me alone. I can't, she cried, her voice breaking. I found a note from Leo. He knew. And you know, too. You've been carrying this for 25 years. It's killing you. Let me help you. There was a long silence from inside. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the door, tears of frustration and grief stinging her eyes. She thought it was over. He was another dead end. Then, she heard the chain rattle. The door opened. Ethan Miller looked like a man who had been haunted into old age. His face was gaunt, his hair thin and lank. He wore a stained t-shirt and jeans that hung off his skeletal frame. But the most shocking thing was his eyes. They were the eyes of a cornered animal, darting, terrified, and filled with an ancient, unbearable sorrow. You shouldn't have come here, he whispered, his eyes scanning the empty trashes, strewn lane behind her, as if expecting to see a monster emerge from the shadows. He'll know. He knows everything that happens in this town. Who, Ethan? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Scoutmaster Rob. Ethan flinched at the name, a full-body recoil, as if she had struck him. He pulled her inside, shutting and locking the door behind them. The trailer was dark and squalid, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and unwashed clothes. An empty bottle of bourbon stood on the small kitchen table. You don't understand, he said, pacing the tiny, cluttered living room. He's not just some guy, he's important. He's on the town council. He's the head of the historical society. He owns half the damn property on Main Street. People love him, they trust him. They'd never believe you. They'll think you're a hysterical woman, dredging up old pain. I don't care what they think, Sarah said, her voice firm. I care about what happened to my brother. And you saw it, didn't you? Ethan stopped pacing and stared at her, his face a mask of anguish. The tough facade crumbled, and the terrified 12-year-old boy was laid bare. Tears streamed down his hollowed cheeks. I was awake, he whispered, the confession a painful tearing sound. I had to pee, but I was too scared to go outside. The woods, the sounds. I heard your brother's tent unzip. I peeked out. I saw him walk toward the tree line. And then, I saw him Peterson. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. A fresh wave of sobs shaking his frail body. He followed him. He didn't call his name, he just stalked him, like a wolf. I heard Leo say something. He sounded surprised. Like Scoutmaster Rob. What are you doing? And then there was a sound, a thud, and then, nothing, just silence. Ethan sank onto a threadbare couch, his face in his hands. He came back to the campsite alone. He looked right at my tent. I swear, he knew I was awake. He just stood there for a minute, listening. I've never been so scared in my life. I thought he was going to come for me next. Why didn't you say anything? Sarah asked, the question soft, devoid of judgment. She was looking at the price of silence, at a life ruined by fear. He told us what to say, Ethan choked out. The next morning, before he found out Leo was missing, he got me, Mark, and Kevin together. He told us that Leo had been sleepwalking, that he'd wandered off, that it was a tragic accident. His eyes, they were like ice, he said, that if any of us told a different story, he'd make sure no one would ever believe us. He said he would ruin our families. My dad, he already had a temper. I knew he'd believe a man like Peterson over me. And Mark's dad was trying to get a loan for his business from the bank Peterson's cousin managed. Kevin's parents were immigrants. They were terrified of any kind of trouble. We were just kids. We were scared, so we lied, and we've been lying ever since. The confession hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was all there. The victim, a sunbeam extinguished. The antagonist, a pillar of the community who was a predator in the dark. And the witness, a boy so haunted by the truth that he had let it destroy his life. Sarah felt a surge of pity for Ethan, but it was quickly consumed by a cold, hard rage. A rage for Leo, for the stolen years, for the web of lies and fear that Peterson had spun around them all. He didn't just kill my brother, Ethan, Sarah said, her voice trembling with the force of her anger. He killed you, too. He just did it slowly. Ethan looked up, his tear-filled eyes meeting hers. For the first time, there was something other than fear in them. A tiny flickering ember of defiance. The secret was out, and in the squalid darkness of that trailer, the truth had finally found its voice. The decision to stay in Blackwood Creek felt like strapping herself into a malfunctioning carnival ride. The ground beneath her was unstable, and the man operating the controls was a psychopath. But leaving was no longer an option. Ethan's confession had transformed her grief into a mission, his brokenness a testament to the long, dark shadow Robert Peterson cast. She convinced Ethan to let her stay with him. It wasn't an act of charity, it was a strategic necessity. He was her only evidence, a fragile, volatile witness who could shatter or flee at any moment. His trailer, once a prison of shame, became their makeshift war room. Her first move was a calculated risk. She drove to the Blackwood Creek Sheriff's Department, the same building where her parents had spent countless agonizing hours 25 years ago. The current sheriff was a man named Hank Miller, no relation to Ethan, a tired-looking man in his late 50s with a potbelly and a drooping mustache. He remembered the Jensen case, of course. It was the town's defining tragedy. Sarah laid it all out, her voice steady and clear, editing only one detail. She didn't mention Ethan. She told the sheriff about the compass, the hidden note, and the coordinates. She showed him a copy of the note. Sheriff Miller looked at the paper, then back at her, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. "Ma'am, Sarah, I understand this is a hard anniversary for you, but don't trust the badge." Leo was a 12-year-old boy. Kids play games, they make up stories, and the coordinates. Sarah pushed, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of his desk. Probably a spot in the woods he liked. A fort, maybe. He leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "Look, Robert Peterson is a pillar of this community. The man led the search for your brother himself. He was heartbroken. We all were. You're making a very serious, unsubstantiated allegation based on what, a 25-year-old scrap of paper?" "It was my brother's last message," she said, her voice low and intense. "He was scared of him." "I'm sorry," the sheriff said, his tone final. He stood up, a clear dismissal. "There's nothing here. No new evidence, just old grief. My advice: go home, try to find some peace." Sarah walked out of the station, the sheriff's patronizing words ringing in her ears. She hadn't expected him to reopen the case, not yet. But she had wanted to see his reaction, and she had. It wasn't just dismissiveness, it was a willful, deliberate refusal to see. An institutional blindness. The injustice was a wall, solid and impenetrable. She hadn't just stumbled upon a single predator. She had stumbled upon an entire ecosystem that allowed him to thrive. The next morning, the escalation began. It was subtle at first, a flat tire on her car. She dismissed it as bad luck, a stray nail on the unpaved road to the trailer park. She called a local tow truck. The driver, a young man with Peterson's real estate logo on his polo shirt, was overly friendly, asking too many questions about why she was back in town, where she was staying. He mentioned, casually, that Mr. Peterson had done so much for his family, that he was a real saint. The message was clear. She was being watched. The second blow was more direct. An eviction notice appeared on Ethan's trailer door. It cited a litany of fabricated violations: unauthorized occupant, unsanitary conditions, overdue rent. Though Ethan, in a rare moment of clarity, showed her the receipt for the month's payment. The trailer park was owned by a holding company. A few minutes of searching on her laptop revealed the holding company was owned by a larger corporation, and the president of that corporation was Robert Peterson. Ethan crumbled. "I told you," he rasped, pacing the trailer like a caged animal. "I told you he knows everything." He's kicking me out. He's going to put me on the street. We have to stop. Please, Sarah, just go home." "No," Sarah said, her own fear a metallic taste in her mouth, but her resolve hardening into steel. "This isn't a reason to stop. This is proof that we're right. He's scared. He's trying to silence us." That night, the cruelty sharpened. A rock shattered the trailer's main window, a spray of glass exploding into the small living room. Tied to the rock was a dead bird, a sparrow, its neck broken. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message of pure primal intimidation. A warning of what happened to little birds that chirped too much. Ethan descended into a full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't light the cigarette he fumbled for. Sarah held him, her own heart hammering, trying to soothe him with words she didn't believe herself. "It's okay. We're okay." But they weren't. The conflict was no longer a theoretical battle over the past. It was a real, physical threat in the present. Peterson wasn't just a respected citizen. He was a bully who commanded a network of loyalists, and had the power to make their lives a living hell. The betrayals came next. Desperate, Sarah called Mark Renshaw again. This time, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "He's threatening us, Mark," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "He threw a rock through our window. He's having Ethan evicted. You have to help us." "You're a lawyer." "I can't," Mark said. His voice was strained. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," Sarah yelled. "What does he have on you?" There was a long pause. When Mark spoke, his voice was heavy with a shame that was 25 years old. "That weekend, after Leah was gone, Peterson took us aside. He told us the story we were supposed to tell. But he did something else. He had a camera, a video camera. He made us do things. To each other, humiliating things, he filmed." Sarah felt sick. The predator hadn't just silenced his witnesses, he had debased them, binding them to him with a shared toxic secret. "He told us he'd keep it as an insurance policy," Mark continued, his voice cracking, "to make sure we all stayed on the same page. A few years ago, when I was up for partner at my firm, I got a package. No return address. It was a DVD. With that video on it, there was no note, just the disc. It was a reminder that he still had it, that he could destroy my career, my marriage, my entire life, with the push of a button. So, no, Sarah, I can't help you. And if you're smart, you'll walk away before he decides to destroy you, too." The call ended, leaving Sarah in a stunned, nauseous silence. The scope of Peterson's depravity was breathtaking. He hadn't just committed a murder. He had spent 25 years meticulously maintaining the cover-up, using fear, shame, and blackmail as his tools. She looked at Ethan, who had fallen into a fitful, whiskey-fueled sleep on the couch. He was the only one left. The weakest link, and her only hope. She knew she had to get the coordinates from the note to an independent source. Someone outside Peterson's sphere of influence. She remembered a college friend who had gone into investigative journalism. His name was Ben, and he worked for a major online news outlet. She took a picture of the note and sent it to him with a cryptic message. "Long story. Can you find out what's at these coordinates? It's deep in the Blackwood National Forest." Off the official trails. The next day, the danger escalated from threats to direct confrontation. Sarah was driving back from the grocery store when a large black pickup truck began to tailgate her. It was aggressive, menacing, riding so close she couldn't see its headlights in her rearview mirror. Her heart pounded. She sped up, but the truck stayed glued to her bumper. On a deserted stretch of road, it swerved and slammed into her rear quarter panel. Her car spun, tires screeching, and ended up in a ditch. The truck pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down. It was Robert Peterson. He wasn't smiling his folksy, real estate agent smile. His face was a cold, granite mask of fury. His pale blue eyes were chips of ice. The mask of the benevolent scoutmaster was gone, and for the first time, Sarah was looking at the monster. "You're a lot like your brother," he said, his voice calm, conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. Stubborn, he wouldn't listen either. I gave him a chance. I told him he needed to learn some respect, that he needed to understand the rules. But he was defiant. You murdered him, Sarah breathed, her hand on the door handle, but she was frozen, pinned by his dead-eyed stare. Accidents happen in the woods, Peterson said, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. It was a horrifying sight. Just like accidents happen on the road. This is a small town, Sarah. People know each other. They help each other out, and they don't like outsiders coming in and stirring up trouble. Go home. This is your only warning. He rolled up the window and drove away, leaving her in the wrecked car, her body trembling. The smell of burnt rubber and her own fear filling the small space. The injustice was no longer an abstract concept. It was a mangled fender, a terrifyingly calm voice, a direct threat from the man who had murdered her brother and held the entire town in his grip. The danger was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. And as she sat in the silence of the ditch, she knew that this was a fight she couldn't win alone. But she also knew she couldn't back down. To back down now would be to let Leo die. All over again? The tension was a wire-pulled taut, humming with the promise of violence. Ready to snap. The days following the car wreck bled into a paranoid haze. Every passing truck on the highway, every unfamiliar face in the grocery store, felt like one of Peterson's spies. The black pickup became a phantom, haunting the edges of Sarah's vision. She and Ethan were prisoners in the trailer, the broken window now covered with a sheet of plywood, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Ethan had retreated completely into the bottle. His brief spark of defiance extinguished by Peterson's blatant act of aggression. He was a ghost again, muttering to himself, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to be kicked in at any moment. The weight of his fear was suffocating, and Sarah felt her own resolve beginning to fray. She was trapped, outmaneuvered, and terrifyingly alone. Her righteous anger was curdling into a sour, helpless dread. She checked her email compulsively, a desperate prayer for a message from Ben, the journalist. Nothing. She imagined her email had been intercepted, that Peterson's reach extended into the digital world as well. The man had become a boogeyman, an omniscient, omnipotent force of evil. The town of Blackwood Creek, once a symbol of her childhood, now felt like a giant open-air prison, and she was its newest inmate. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about justice for Leo. It was about survival. Then, one rainy afternoon, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. It could be him. It could be another threat. She answered, her voice a tense whisper. "Hello, Sarah. It's Dr. Liu, Kevin." Sarah's heart leaped. Kevin, the doctor from California, the one who had told her to drop it. His voice was completely different from their first call. The clinical flatness was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged urgency. "I'm sorry," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm so sorry, I was a coward. We were all cowards. Mark called me. He told me what Peterson did to you. What he said to you. We can't let him keep doing this." "What changed your mind, Kevin?" Sarah asked, her voice cautious. "My daughter," he said, and his voice broke. "She just joined the Girl Scouts. Last night, they had a welcome ceremony. All these little girls, their faces so bright, so trusting, and their leader, he had that same smile, that same look in his eyes. And I saw him. I saw Peterson. I saw what we let him get away with. I couldn't sleep. I realized that our silence, it didn't just protect us, it enabled him. It gave him permission to do it again. Who else has he hurt over the years, Sarah? How many other boys?" The question hung in the air, sickening and profound. "Mark is terrified," Kevin continued. "That video, it's hung over his head his whole life. But he's a lawyer. He knows that if he comes forward, he could be disbarred for blackmail, even if he's the victim. He's trapped. But me, I'm in California. He can't touch me as easily, and I have something. I think it could help. Something." "What is it?" Sarah asked, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. It was my 16th birthday, about a year after Leo. My parents bought me a video camera. It was my favorite thing. I took it everywhere. We had a scout meeting, one of the winter ones, at Peterson's house. He lived in that big creepy Victorian on the hill back then. He had this workshop in the basement. He said it was for troop projects. He told us never to go down there without him. But that night, he was upstairs, charming our parents, and I was a stupid kid. I wanted to show off. I went down there. The camera was recording. Sarah held her breath. It was wrong, Sarah, the whole basement. There was a weird smell, like chemicals, and on his workbench, there were things, trophies, a collection, little things, a baseball card, a kid's watch, a pocket knife, things that belonged to other boys in the troop, and in the middle of it all was your brother's Cub Scout neckerchief, slide, the one he'd carved himself, the little wooden wolf head. I recognized it instantly. I zoomed in on it with the camera, the attic, the mothballs, the small folded uniform. Sarah pictured the neckerchief, and the empty space where the wolf head slide should have been. And then, Kevin's voice dropped to a choked whisper. He came downstairs. He hadn't heard me. He was talking to himself, muttering. He picked up Leo's slide and he was talking to it. He said, "You thought you were so clever, didn't you, little smart mouth? No one talks back to me. No one." And then he laughed. It was the most horrible sound I've ever heard. Was hidden behind this old furnace. I thought my heart was going to explode. I managed to get out of there without him seeing me. I ran all the way home. I was so scared, I hid the tape. I buried it in a box in my closet, and I tried to forget it ever existed. I still have it, Sarah. I've moved 5 times since I left Blackwood Creek, and every time, I've taken that box with me. I don't even know why. Maybe I knew this day would come. The hidden clue. It wasn't a diary or a confession. It was something better. It was a recording. Visual, undeniable. Proof. Peterson, with Leo's trophy, confessing to his motive, his rage-fueled pride. Can you send it to me? Sarah asked, her mind racing. Overnight it? No, that's too slow. Can you digitize it? Upload it somewhere. I'm on my way to a specialist now, Kevin said. A guy who transfers old formats. He's discreet. I'll have it to you by morning. Sarah. Be careful when he finds out we're talking, he'll come for you. The call ended. Sarah's hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. The wire of tension that had been humming with dread was now vibrating with the promise of a reckoning. The full conspiracy was laid bare. It wasn't just a murder, it was a systematic campaign of terror, blackmail, and psychological abuse, orchestrated to protect one man's fragile, monstrous ego. And now, she had the weapon that could bring it all crashing down. That evening, her phone buzzed again. It was Ben, the journalist. His message was short, and it made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Sarah, I got my source to check out those coordinates. It's a sealed well on an abandoned piece of property. The property records are a mess, owned by a series of shell corporations, but the original owner, back in the 90s, Robert Peterson, and my source, did a ground-penetrating radar scan. Sarah, there's something down there, something man-made. The size of an oil drum. I've got a team on the way, but I'm telling you this now. You need to get out of there. You are in serious danger. The abandoned well, the oil drum, a makeshift coffin. The truth was more horrific than she could have imagined. Peterson hadn't just killed Leo, he had erased him, hiding his body where it would never be found. The coordinates weren't a map to a fort. They were a map to a grave. Leo's final act hadn't been a warning. It had been an accusation, a silent finger pointing from the darkness. She looked at Ethan, passed out on the couch, the empty bourbon bottle on the floor beside him. She couldn't leave him, but she couldn't stay. Her phone rang. It was Peterson. She stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. She let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the notification popped up. With a trembling finger, she played the message. It wasn't his voice, it was a recording. A young boy's voice, distorted and stacky, but unmistakable. It was Leo. "And then I'll be able to navigate by the stars," the voice said, full of pride and excitement. It was from the troop meeting before the trip, when Leo had been showing off his grandfather's compass. And then, Peterson's voice cut in, smooth and avuncular. "That's very impressive, Leo. You're a very bright boy, almost too bright for your own good." The message ended. It was a declaration of war. He knew she had the compass. He knew she'd found the note. And now, with Kevin and Mark talking, he knew his carefully constructed world was about to implode. He wasn't trying to scare her away anymore. He was enjoying this. The cat, finally deciding to stop playing with the mouse. The plot had twisted, spiraling out from a personal tragedy into a public scandal on the verge of eruption. The tension was at its absolute peak. The evidence was coming. The press was coming. And the monster knew it. He was cornered. And a cornered predator is the most dangerous kind. The lights in the trailer flickered and went out. The rain beat. A frantic tattoo on the metal roof. Outside, in the darkness, Sarah heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road. A vehicle was approaching. It stopped right outside their trailer. A car door opened and closed. Then, a heavy, deliberate knock on the door. Ethan shot up from the couch, his eyes wide with terror. "He's here," he whimpered. "Oh God, he's here." Sarah's mind was a maelstrom of fear and calculation. The videotape from Kevin was her long-range weapon. Ben's team and the police they would bring were her cavalry. But they weren't here yet. Right now, in this flimsy metal box, she and Ethan were alone, and the killer was on their doorstep. The public scandal was hours away. The immediate, personal danger was seconds away. The knock came again, louder this time, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the trailer. This was the endgame. The knock was a cannon shot in the claustrophobic silence of the trailer. It wasn't the polite rap of a neighbor. It was the hard, authoritative thud of someone who didn't expect to be denied entry. Ethan was a statue of terror, his breath hitched in his throat, his eyes locked on the door. Sarah's mind, however, was shockingly clear. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it had been burned clean by a white-hot clarifying rage. The time for being a victim was over. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice ablaze in the darkness. "The back window. Go. Run to the woods. Get out of here." "I can't," he whimpered, shaking his head, his body trembling. "My legs. They won't move." "Yes, you can," she insisted, grabbing his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to. You are the witness. If he gets both of us, none of this matters. Go now." The desperation in her voice seemed to break his paralysis. He scrambled toward the small bedroom in the back. Sarah's eyes darted around the dark living room, searching for a weapon. Her hand closed around the heavy, empty bourbon bottle on the floor. It wasn't much, but it felt better than nothing. Bang, bang, bang. This time, the door shuddered in its frame. "Sarah, I know you're in there," Peterson's voice called out, the folksy charm replaced by a chilling, predatory calm. "Just want to talk. We can clear all this up." Sarah didn't answer. She flattened herself against the wall next to the door, the bottle held tight in her sweating palm. She could hear Ethan fumbling with the latch on the back window. A loud crack, then the sound of him scrambling out into the rainy night. Relief, sharp and fierce, shot through her. At least one of them would get away. A splintering crash echoed from the front of the trailer as Peterson kicked the door in. The cheap lock gave way instantly, and the door swung inward, revealing his silhouette against the stormy, gray light. He was bigger than she remembered, a mountain of a man filling the doorway. He took a step inside, his eyes scanning the darkness, searching for her. "The boy is gone," he said, his voice casual, as if commenting on the weather. "That's a shame, but you're the one I really wanted to see." He took another step, and another, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He saw her then, pressed against the wall, the bottle raised. He smiled. It was a genuinely amused smile. The smile of a man who found her defiance pathetic and quaint. "Really, Sarah," he chuckled. "A bottle? After all this? That's the best you can do?" He lunged for her. But Sarah had been waiting for this. She didn't swing at his head. She swung low, putting all her weight behind it, and smashed the bottle against his knee. The sound was a sickening crunch of glass and bone. Peterson roared, a sound of pure agony and surprise, and his leg buckled. He went down on one knee, his face contorted in a mask of pain and disbelief. In that split second, Sarah was past him and out the door, sprinting into the torrential rain. She didn't look back. She ran, her lungs burning, her feet slipping in the mud, the sound of Peterson's enraged bellows echoing behind her. She didn't run toward the road. She ran toward the woods, the same woods that had swallowed her brother 25 years ago. It was a desperate, primal instinct. The forest was a chaotic labyrinth of dripping branches and sucking mud. The rain was a solid sheet, plastering her hair to her face, blinding her. She could hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind her, still roaring, a wounded animal in pursuit. He was injured, but he was still stronger, still faster, and he knew this terrain. Her mind raced. Where was Ben? Where was the cavalry? She was alone. The thought was a fresh stab of terror. But then, another thought pushed through. Kevin's video. She had it. Her phone was in her jacket pocket, zipped tight. In the mad dash from the trailer, she hadn't had time to check her email, but she had to believe it was there. The weapon, the truth. She risked a glance behind her. He was closer now, a lumbering shadow limping heavily but moving with a terrifying purpose. She had to do something, create a diversion, find a better hiding place. Her eyes scanned the dark woods, and then she saw it. A flicker of light through the trees. Not a flashlight, a screen dot. It was Ethan. He hadn't run. He was huddled at the base of a massive oak tree, his phone in his hands, the screen illuminating his terrified face. He was trying to call for help. "Ethan!" "No," she screamed. The light. It was too late. Peterson saw it too. He changed direction, a low growl rumbling in his chest, and started moving toward Ethan. Sarah's choice was instant and absolute. She couldn't let him get to Ethan. She was the one he wanted. She turned and ran directly at Peterson, screaming, a wild, incoherent battle cry. The move surprised him. He stopped, turning to face her, a look of confusion on his face. That was all the time she needed. She didn't slow down. She lowered her shoulder and slammed into his injured leg with all her force. He screamed, a high, thin sound of agony, and toppled backward, landing hard in the mud with a wet thud. His head hit a partially exposed root with a sickening crack. He lay still. Sarah stood over him, panting, her body screaming with adrenaline and exertion. Was he dead? Had she killed him? For a moment, she just stared, the rain washing the mud from his upturned face. He looked smaller now, pathetic. Just a man. Then, his eyes fluttered open. He groaned, dazed but alive. From the road, she heard the sound of sirens. Multiple sirens, growing closer, wailing through the night. The cavalry had arrived. The next hour was a blur of flashing red and blue lights, of uniformed officers, of paramedics strapping Peterson to a gurney. Sheriff Miller was there, his face a grim, shocked mask. He wouldn't look at her. Ben, her journalist friend, ran to her, wrapping her in a blanket. His face etched with concern. "We got the video," he said, his voice urgent. "Kevin Liu sent it to me and him at the same time. The sheriff's office got an anonymous email with a link to a video file an hour ago. That's what started the sirens. My team is at the well. They're bringing in excavation equipment." The payoff wasn't a single, explosive courtroom moment. It was a series of rolling thunderclaps, each one more deafening than the last. The first was the video. Ben's outlet, working with Kevin, released it that night. It went viral before dawn. The headline was stark. Hometown hero Scoutmaster caught on tape with missing boy's memento, confessing motive. The video was devastating. Peterson, in his creepy basement workshop, muttering to Leo's neckerchief, slide. His face, a canvas of smug psychopathic rage. The public adulation that had shielded him for 25 years evaporated in an instant. The story was picked up by national news, by morning talk shows, by true crime podcasts. The monster was unmasked, his folksy persona stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. The second thunderclap came from the well. Just after sunrise, the excavation team, under the glare of news cameras that had descended on Blackwood Creek, pulled the rusted oil drum from the earth. When they cut it open, the collective gasp of the onlookers was audible. Inside, preserved in the anaerobic environment, were the remains of a small boy, still wearing the tattered remnants of a Boy Scout t-shirt. And clutched in his skeletal hand was a heavy brass compass. He had been holding it when he died. The third and most cathartic payoff was not for the public, but for Sarah. 2 days later, Mark Renshaw, the lawyer, walked into the state police barracks. His wife was by his side. He turned over the DVD he had received years ago, the insurance policy Peterson had used to blackmail him. He gave a full statement, not just about the events surrounding Leo's murder, but about the abuse and humiliation he and the other boys had suffered. He knew it would have professional consequences, but the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. His public confession prompted Kevin Liu to fly in and give his own statement. The narrative was no longer just about a murder. It was about a pattern of predatory behavior, of a man who used an institution built on trust as his personal hunting ground. The public justice was swift. Peterson, recovering from his leg injury in a hospital under police guard, was arraigned. Via video link, he was charged with murder, kidnapping, and a host of other crimes related to his abuse of the other boys. His empire in Blackwood Creek crumbled. The town council ousted him. The Historical Society removed his name from their charter. His real estate agency was shuttered, its windows soaped over with graffiti. The town that had once revered him now reviled him with a furious, burning passion. The most cinematic moment came during his bail hearing. The prosecutor played Kevin's video on a large screen in the courtroom. As the footage played, of him talking to the neckerchief slide, a low murmur of disgust rippled through the gallery. But then, the camera, still recording, caught something else. On the wall behind Peterson's workbench was a corkboard. Pinned to it were photos. Dozens of them. Photos of boys from his troop over the years, all of them sleeping. Candid shots. Taken in tents, in cabins, intimate, violating. The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with a shared, horrified understanding. This wasn't about one boy. Leo wasn't the first, and he likely wouldn't have been the last. Sarah watched the proceedings on a laptop from her motel room. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel joy. She felt a profound hollowed-out sense of release. The fight was over, the truth was out. The monster was in a cage. She had kept her promise to the boy with the compass. Justice had been delivered, not in a single neat blow, but in a messy, public and brutally explosive unraveling of a 25-year lie. The viral moment wasn't just a soundbite, it was the roar of a community waking up to the monster they had nurtured in their midst, and it was a roar that would echo for a very, very long time. The media storm that engulfed Blackwood Creek was like a forest fire, scorching everything in its path before, eventually, inevitably, moving on to the next tragedy. The next scandal. For a few weeks, the town was the epicenter of the nation's morbid curiosity. Satellite trucks lined Main Street. Reporters with perfect hair and somber expressions did their stand-ups in front of the courthouse. The police station, the entrance to the Blackwood National Forest. Then, as Peterson's trial date was set, and the legal machinery began its slow-grinding work, the trucks packed up and left, leaving behind a town that was bruised, silent, and deeply ashamed. Sarah stayed. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. There was one last thing she had to do. Leo's remains were released to her, and she arranged for a proper funeral. It wasn't the big, public affair the town leadership offered, a performative act of communal atonement. It was a small, quiet service at the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. The only people she invited were Mark, Kevin, and Ethan. They stood before a simple, newly carved headstone. It read, Leo Jensen, 1988 to 2000. Finally home. The four of them were a strange, fractured family, bound by a shared trauma. Mark, in his tailored suit, looked somber and exhausted. The scandal had cost him his partnership at the firm, but his wife had stood by him, and, in his eyes, there was a lightness Sarah had never seen before, the look of a man who had finally put down the heaviest burden of his life. Kevin, the doctor, stood straight and tall, his guilt now channeled into a fierce, protective energy. He had started a foundation for victims of institutional abuse, giving a purpose to his pain. And then there was Ethan. He was sober, his hands were steady. He had checked himself into a rehab facility the day after Peterson's arrest. He looked thin, fragile, but his eyes, for the first time since Sarah had met him, were clear. The ghost was gone. He was just a man, quiet and sad, but whole. They didn't say much. They each placed a hand on the cool granite of the headstone. There were no grand speeches, no easy platitudes about healing and closure. There was only a shared, silent acknowledgement of the cost of truth. The cost had been a boy's life, and a quarter-century of fear and silence that had poisoned all of them. After the others had left, Sarah stayed behind. She took the brass compass from her pocket. It was clean now, polished, the scratches and grime of the years wiped away. The police had given it back to her from the evidence locker. It was, the DA had said, the first witness. She opened the backplate. The tiny hidden compartment was empty. The note was gone. Now, a key piece of evidence logged in a sterile plastic bag. Waiting for the trial, she closed the compass and placed it on the grave, nestled next to the small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked from the edge of the woods. Her grandfather had said it would always point to what you were looking for. For 25 years, it had been a silent, patient sentinel, guarding a secret, pointing to a hidden grave. It had led her to the truth, and the truth had, in its own brutal way, set them all free. She walked away from the grave, down the hill, and back into the town that was now her own. Her mother's house was still there, waiting. But it no longer felt like a tomb of memories. It felt like a beginning. The case against Peterson would be long and ugly, and she would be there for every minute of it, a constant, visible reminder of the boy he had erased. Months later, on the day the trial was set to begin, a package arrived. At her house there was no return address. Inside was a shoebox. A little thrill of recognition, of bittersweet nostalgia, went through her. She opened it. It was from Ethan. He had recreated Leo's museum of important things. There was a small, perfectly smooth stone that looked like a bird's egg. There was a vintage Coca-Cola bottle cap. There was a single, iridescent feather. And in the center, nestled in cotton, was a small, intricately carved piece of wood. It was a wolf's head. Ethan, who had always been good with his hands, had carved a perfect replica of Leo's neckerchief slide. Tucked underneath was a short, handwritten letter. Sarah, I know it's not the real one. The real one is probably locked away in an evidence room forever. But I wanted you to have this. To remember the boy, not just the victim. I go to meetings every day. Some days are harder than others. But for the first time since I was 12, I feel like I can breathe. Thank you for making me brave. Thank you for bringing your brother home. Ethan. Sarah held the small wooden wolf in the palm of her hand, its tiny carved eyes seeming to look up at her. And for the first time since she had opened that dusty box in the attic, she cried. Not tears of grief or rage or frustration. They were quiet tears of a deep aching and bittersweet healing. The wound would always be there, a scar on her soul, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a smile and a badge. But it was no longer a gaping, infected wound. It was a clean scar, a testament to a fight that was won, to a promise that was kept. The emotional echo of Leo's life and death would linger forever. It was in the silence of his empty room, in the sad, clear eyes of Ethan Miller, in the haunting beauty of the Blackwood Forest, But it was also in the strength she had found in herself, in the unlikely brotherhood forged in the aftermath, and in the small, carved wolf's head that now sat on her mantelpiece. A tragic reminder of the cost of truth, but also a powerful symbol of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring, unbreakable bond of a sister's love. The compass now pointed north again, its true purpose served. It had led them all out of the woods,